There are days and occasions which alter the course of history. The Battle of Normandy in June 1944, the civil rights movement in the US, led by Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. in the 60s, the imposition of emergency in India in 1975, the disintegration of the Soviet Empire in the late 1980s and the end of the Cold War, the fall of the Berlin Wall, and then of course we had in 2003-4 we had the invasion of Iraq by US. In 2008 September, the collapse of Lehman Brothers. Cut to June 23rd, 2016. Brexit. 20, 25, 30 years down the line, when we write the history, when the history of our generation is written, probably this day will go down as a red letter day that did alter the course of history. For better or worse, we'll know quite soon. But it's already caused a political earthquake, economic earthquake also. The British Prime Minister David Cameron has announced his resignation, that he is going to be stepping down in October and making way for a new leader. He's claimed moral responsibility. You have the stock markets worldwide which have tanked, India being no exception. Finance Minister Arun Jaitley has said turbulence, uncertainty, volatility are the new norms. We should be braced for turbulent times ahead. The RBI Governor Raghuram Rajan had some soothing words for the markets, that the RBI would be willing to intervene, would watch the markets closely, and would infuse liquidity if required. But look at some of the reactions that have come in. You had Philip Baker, Queen's Counsel, and what a scathing reaction you had in an email that sent to me. He said, the United Kingdom has been in decline and breakup for a century. The referendum is the beginning of the final stages in that breakup. And I'll read the last couple of lines from his statement. The small majority of an ignorant and bigoted population has done the most stupid thing possible, voting as turkeys for an early Christmas. The Scots and possibly the Northern Irish will soon express the view that their future is for independence in Europe and will go ahead on that basis. This will leave a little England to gradually revert to a small, wet, insignificant part island on the edge of Europe. I also spoke to former OECD tax policy director Jeffrey Owens on what would be the tax implications of this vote. And quite interesting. I think the big one, the big statement that he made was that whatever decisions the EU takes on tax policies now will no longer be applicable to the UK. We'll go through some parts of his statement in a while, but to discuss the implications, the macroeconomic impact, a bit of tax policy impact. They're joined by a special panel. Mukesh Goswami of DMR, legal tax policy expert as well. Praveen Sood, tax head at Tata Steel, and Tata Group has quite big operations in the United Kingdom. And Shankar Iyer, international tax practitioner and chairman of the Iyer practice. He joins us from Singapore, one of the financial market capitals of the world. New York, Singapore, and of course London. London any longer? We'll see. We'll see in a while. Amay, my colleague, joins us here from the Pune office. Cut straight to Shankar. Shankar, tell us what's been the impact like. What are people in Singapore saying?
I think people are still in a bit of shock at the moment. Nobody expected this outcome on this vote. All the pundits were actually forecasting a Remain vote. Even in fact, the Leave leadership themselves, I think, were expecting a defeat. So I guess right now nobody expected this. But certainly the Singapore Prime Minister has come out 1 hour ago to say that the whole world is affected by this, not just UK, but even the whole of Europe is affected by this. And you're already seeing clamor from right-wing parties in the European Union for asking for their own referendums. So God knows how the European Union project itself will be shaken by this vote. And Singapore is in the world global scene, so definitely there'll be impact. I think will be all around the whole world will be affected, as we said in the opening remarks. But I think it's still too early. So everyone is digesting this whole thing. The shock is, I think, the only word I can use now at the moment.
Praveenji, Tata Group has a lot of operations in UK. You have the JLR, you have Jaguar, of course, Chorus no longer, but still, Praveenji, what is your reaction as a person representing an Indian MNC with huge stakes in the UK? How do you see this development?
Yeah, the first thing is Chorus still remains with us. It's not gone anywhere.
It does, but I'm saying that you're in the process. Yeah, sure.
Right. The big impact of all this is that there is a market. and this is expected to possibly inhibit business activity in the entire Europe. And possibly, I hope there is no domino effect, as Mr. Iyer just mentioned. There might be chances of other countries actually coming in and looking at referendums and possibly eyeing Brexit or an exit from the EU or European Union. But there will definitely be a dampening of industrial activity. You would have seen how ECB has been on a bond buying spree. I think it will have limited arsenal to possibly prep up activity in Europe, and that's going to be a big thing. The country, if they start trying to attract investments, we'll have to then possibly see how that pans out. But I personally think in the long run and the medium run, India seems to be in a sweet spot because they will look at India as a major strategic partner, be it EU, be it UK. So I believe that there will be a lot of incentives coming from these places in case if we want to make outbound investments to Europe.
Mukesh bhai, first of all, your initial thoughts, and then I want to get your reaction to this quote from Jeffrey Owens. He says the immediate issue is to deal with the economic fallout, but the message that the voters have sent out today is that the vote today should send a warning signal to Brussels, read EU, that EU citizens may want less, not more harmonization with the European Union. I'll come to that later, Mukesh bhai, but first your initial thoughts.
Well, I think as everybody mentioned earlier, this kind of a development has an impact on global markets, global currencies. People start predicting what would be the future of trade between the UK as a part of the EU and UK as not part of the EU. My immediate reaction, purely from an Indian standpoint, is really threefold. Number one, when this kind of volatility occurs in foreign exchange markets and speculation on what the future of the trade would look like, investors tend to get extremely nervous. And no matter how much uh, you know, comforting statements are made, this is not a small development, and it's only in the coming weeks and coming months we will get to know. But right now, there is nervousness. So the most important question that we as a country in India should have is that would this mean that foreign funds may look out for less riskier markets than India? Purely from a fund manager standpoint, in situations of nervousness, the tendency is to move towards less risky assets, whether it's gold or government bonds or domestic equity markets or whatever it is. So I think this is one thing that we should watch out. So I'm not terribly concerned about how the Indian markets have reacted today adversely, which is what the global markets have reacted adversely. But what does this mean by way of guidance from an Indian fund standpoint? Arun, I'm finding it difficult to predict if this is going to have any impact purely from a tax viewpoint. But yes, EU being, England, UK being a very important component of the EU, had a fairly high degree of influence in Brussels from a trade and policy standpoint, from an ECJ standpoint, from a WTO standpoint, so on and so forth. So I think that it's too premature for us to speculate what would be the impact. I'm not in a position to comment on Jeffrey's statement, except that as tax professionals, we've always uh, looked at it from a distance as to how the EU is impacted, and if any kind of tax reform results in discriminatory practices, then the EU Commission and the European Court of Justice steps in at that point in time. So now with UK not being a part of the EU, it would not be bound by the ECJ or the EU Commission purely from its tax reform standpoint, and it will be largely driven by what the UK does on a go-forward basis insofar as its tax agenda is concerned.
Amit, your first thoughts. I did also ask Jeffrey about a possible impact on BEPS, and it's too early. But he said that given that the UK is one of the countries leading the BEPS project at both the G20, G8, and even the Working Party level, so he said there wouldn't be any major impact on BEPS per se as far as tax policy is concerned. Amit?
Right. Arun, I would agree with that observation because BEPS project has nothing to do with EU per se, and UK as a country independently is also a party to the BEPS project and is participating. So per se, EU exit of UK will not have an impact on the BEPS positively or otherwise. Just from a tax point of view, Arun, one observation is that US has been negotiating transatlantic trade and investment partnership with European Union, and with UK moving out of this particular out of EU potentially, this will it would mean that UK may not be part of this particular transatlantic partnership, which does create an interesting impact from a trade and business point of view.
Yeah, I think one point which may not be related to tax at all, but a very important message that's come out, Shankar, very clearly, and which is something the elitist class cannot ignore. The working class voter in the US, in the UK, is rejecting globalization, does not want free trade. He feels it has not benefited them, and that's exactly the question I put to Jeffrey, and he felt the same, that the people of UK today have sent a message that globalization benefits have not reached them, and which is exactly why you've seen Donald Trump win the Republican nomination on the strength of the working class voters. Look at what one of the websites, the news articles that I read says: populism is rising everywhere as people decide that the government does not listen and does not care. But this is even more significant because Britain has never been the source of populist uprisings like this. If Britain can vote itself out of Europe, America can vote itself in for Trump. Shankar, this definitely has much more implications beyond just Britain going out of the EU. We are talking of popular uprisings everywhere. The working class people in many developed countries are disenchanted, and if it is going to have an effect on globalization, on many of these countries having to rethink their economic policy, Shankar.
I think so. In UK, I think the arguments seem to be more in terms of, I guess, immigration was the big factor, which was argued in favor of Brexit. There's foreigners coming in from Europe into and migrants, in fact, which is then putting pressure on the health services and other public services, and that I think was a big, and also the issue of sovereignty. That some unelected officials in other countries were effectively controlling, also always supreme power of the parliament was being ignored. And those are the more powerful arguments I saw rather than necessarily free trade. So UK on its own will of course need to have trade agreements going forward if it's going to succeed. And but I agree with you, that the popular uprising around the world seems to be for people to take back control and not go down the traditional politicians' route. But clearly, this has an impact globally, and I think what's happened here, we're seeing in America, rightly so, with what's happening there with the Republican Party and so on. So I think, but kind of like Singapore, which of course doesn't quite understand this, because obviously here free trade has been the hallmark of the country's success over the past 50 years, and so one hopes that, there 50 years ago, don't forget, Singapore was part of Malaysia and was injected with nothing, and then it sort of fought its way back to what it is today. But perhaps UK, in good time, will also be able to reinvent itself and perhaps become the Singapore of Europe as well, by having, basically modernizing its economy, embracing free trade, and so on. Let's see how it develops. But clearly, the next short term, next 3 to 5 years, I'm suspecting a lot of uncertainty and problems. But long term, they'll have to find a solution for their own survival, I think.
But Mukesh bhai, and then I'll come to Praveen ji for the same question. Mukesh bhai, if all countries now want to take the people want to take power back in their own hands, and everyone wants to put a pause to this world of the era of globalization in which we live. What does it do to free trade? What does it do to we were looking at countries and economies without borders? Doesn't it have an impact on India as well? If every country looks inwards, what happens to a lot of Indian students who want to study abroad, a lot of Indians who want to work abroad? You know, one third of Microsoft is comprised of Indians. Mukesh bhai, it definitely will have an impact.
Well, the answer is yes, but to your question, is this a setback for globalization? Yes. It's just the end of globalization? No. I think what will be interesting to watch out in the next few weeks is how are the other members of the EU reacting to this development that has occurred? Or I would rather put it this way: how are the political parties in some of the major EU economies have reacted to it? So I have something very interesting. The France National Front political party tweeted "Victory for Freedom," and she has now called for a debate, rather not a debate, for a vote on EU membership for France. And similar voices are being heard in Italy, Netherlands, and beyond. So, no matter how much Donald Tusk, the president of the European Council, is issuing statements virtually every hour to assuage the sentiments, there is bound to be reaction on a development of this kind. And now he has said in his latest statement that this is not a moment for hysterical reactions. We are determined to keep our unity as 27 members. And he has also said that until the time UK formally leaves the EU, the EU law will continue and apply to and within the UK. And he has also emphasized that it means all rights and obligations as well. So, to cut the long story short, Arun, it is a setback for globalization. I don't expect a kind of end of the road for globalization, because the kind of path that the world had decided to walk in the last 3 to 4 decades is not something that can reverse back. And it is particularly important for growing economies, large economies, whether you call it the BRICS economies or you extend it to economies such as Turkey and Indonesia and others. Uh, this is where the growth is coming from. As a matter of fact, uh, whether it's the OECD or it's the EU, uh, all the policies, economic and trade policies that are getting shaped in many of these developed parts of the world uh, are getting shaped keeping in mind the growth in the emerging economies. So certainly it's an important risk factor that emerging economies have to weigh in, and it's also a reminder as to what kind of volatile world we are living in. But I don't think that uh, this is going to be a major setback. I think it's too premature and too speculative to make that comment. I would rather wait to hear now where is this debate going in the other parts of the EU. Uh, does this mean just a significant setback to EU, which it sounds like, or does it mean end of the EU?
Yeah,
But the world is much beyond the EU. So I
sure.
think an important development, can't let it go out of my sight for several weeks to come. But I don't think that there is any cause for panic such for countries such as India.
Praveenji, Shankar said this vote reflected maybe a sentiment against immigration. Let's assume that was the case, Praveenji. In that case, wouldn't groups like yours, big corporates, have to recalibrate their employment and business strategies?
No, one that UK was always taken to the gateway for Europe. And to that extent, we need to see how European Union reacts to this sort of an exit of UK. What sort of policies come in the wake of this exit? The fact is that you talked about globalization, and I totally echo Mukesh Bhai's views it's a setback, but globalization is not going to stop. In fact, it's basically a fight between haves and have-nots. We have always been seeing in a country like India. It has now now with by changing their strategic position economically as far as their country's interests are concerned. Hence, what this immigration from European Union might stop, but UK in its own cannot stop immigration. They would like high caliber immigration, and that's where India possibly might score. We have a basic
Oops.
here language and the talent which is available position else. The other thing is that it is expected that each country will now try to do strategic investment, and for that they will give tax breaks and incentives. When you talk about BPS and England being UK being a signatory of time, the context was different. Now it is very different. Now, if you look at the harmful tax practice or Article 5 there, then you can possibly see how do these people get that strategic initiative in a big continent. Same is the case with going to be with European Union. And what are those goodies which are going to be offered? And where is it going to stop? So this is going to be a big question. Yes, it is going to take time to settle down, but for that period of 2 years, as far as India is concerned, we are 65 to 70% of our economy is in any way inward looking. It is domestic led. We are looking out for strategic partnerships, and we might just like to possibly look for strategic partnerships with other than UK, to say in the European Union. So this is how it is expected to pan out. Again, it's too premature to really comment. Let's see what are the reactions going to be worldwide.
Yeah, Amin, in fact, I was just coming to you. Jeffrey Owens had a very interesting take on the impact on UK tax policy, and while he did say that he has said that UK will no longer be bound by any decision of EU on taxation. The the EU tax directives and conventions. The new UK government will now have a choice on whether to endorse or not. The decisions of the European Court of Justice will no longer apply once the UK leaves the EU. And very important, Jeffrey has added that major tax reforms will now be stuck or will be put on hold in the UK. I think that's quite significant. He says, till the markets calm down, major tax reforms in the UK are a no-go. Amen.
Right. So two comments, Arun. UK, as you know, in the last few budgets has announced a roadmap for reducing its headline corporate tax rates. And these rates are amongst the most competitive rates available in the world, the headline corporate tax rate. Now, with UK moving out of EU on an overall basis, they stand to gain. But I think the economic impact of this exit and finally how it impacts the finances will definitely have a bearing on this tax rate reduction roadmap that has been announced. That's number one, and that was one lucrative aspect I think which Indian MNCs did consider. Second, you rightly mentioned, going forward, UK will not be bound, so to speak, by EU directives and EU Court of Justice. One immediate impact from an India point of view has been this, for example, a parent subsidiary directive, which Indian companies for European structures have particularly used with UK as a holding company jurisdiction. Of course, UK domestic law does provide certain incentives, and additionally, these directives were there, which no longer will be available. So that perhaps will require Indian MNCs to relook at UK headquartered structures going into Europe.
Yeah, Mukesh, on the tax policy part itself, would you agree with Jeffrey's comments on the impact on tax policy?
Yes, I would agree with Jeffrey because one, I can't challenge him, and second, I think on a more serious note, I think Ameya rightly amplified the concern as a result. So the UK tax reforms, which were aiming at bringing down the corporate tax rates due to its commitment with the EU not to have discriminatory policies. If the UK is not going to be bound by the EU, then in that case, the locals in the UK may fear a potential to raise the tax rates which will be applicable to UK nationals.
Yeah, and Mukesh bhai, just one more. But Shankar, I'll come to you on that. UK will now renegotiate a lot of the free trade agreements over the next 2 years, and we will see how that goes, Shankar. But again, that could open a whole round of tax competition again. I mean, we just seem to be going around in circles. You have PEPs which wants to put an end to tax competition, and when you renegotiate some of these free trade agreements, you wonder whether it's going to lead to a whole again a game of tax competition. Yeah, Shankar.
So, Arun, if I can just make
Yes,
one
sir.
comment, because everybody is talking about this 2-year deadline to exit, so on and so forth. As I'm
Yeah,
hearing it, that the lawmakers, who were preparing for Plan B, and this is what one of the banker friends of mine in London told me today morning. Uh, did mention that the Plan B was that if the Brexit vote is to exit from the EU, then over a period of these 2 years, and this 2-year period is extendable, and I'll just come to how it is extendable. Negotiate continued access to the EU single market on preferential terms. Obviously, the deal is unlikely to include the non-discrimination safeguards, but the 2-year period is good enough to, renegotiate the single market preferential status. Whilst this 2-year deadline continues, the 2-year deadline is extendable, and if it is extendable, if all the rest of the 28 member states agree. Now I wonder what could be the reason for them not to agree. That's not like trying to suggest that they will agree, but I'm just trying to say that that this 2-year period is extendable. The third aspect is that uh, the process will require the UK to unpick this 80,000 pages of the EU law, which bind UK to the EU. And some of
80,000,
them
Mukesh bhai,
believe
80,000.
there are 80,000 pages of the EU law which bind essentially all the EU members. That's what the lawmakers in the EU say. And and there have been examples of countries such as Norway and Switzerland who are non-EU countries, but they bind themselves with a substantial amount of this 80,000 page law. So I think you need to now start giving context and to the implication, at least from a regulatory and a legal standpoint, that what does this mean for the UK? And finally, the final divorce settlement, which will be signed between the UK and the EU, will need to have basis to agree how the assets will be divided, how there will be resolution on EU budget issues, and also to set out the future rights of EU nationals in the UK and vice versa. So I think you're dealing with a host of implications on all of these aspects from a legal standpoint, and we will see in the coming weeks and in the coming months how all of these issues will be dealt with.
Shankar.
I think but just comment on what Mukesh was talking about, this 2-year transition period. It'll be, of course, a very busy period. There's so many issues to be resolved. One school of thought is, of course, it should be done properly and therefore some stability. But on the other hand, the other school of thought is that if the EU makes it too easy for UK or give them some soft treatment, they'll only encourage further countries to want to leave EU, knowing that there's no major consequence to them doing so. So I guess there'll be very interesting debates coming up in the next few weeks and months within EU itself. How tough they should be with UK on this delinking, and how much privilege they should give them going forward, just to make it set an example for others not to do the same thing. Otherwise, there could be too many other followers. But in terms of tax policy going forward, it's an interesting dilemma. On one hand, UK will have to make it an attractive country going forward to bring in the investments and so on, which otherwise might lose by leaving the EU. And so therefore, on one school will be to try and continue as within BEPS framework, of course, to get more incentives and so on coming through. On the other hand, of course, UK's public finances are not in good shape. So, and with the social policies they have and the all the National Health Service and all the other benefits they give, they will have to make sure that the public finances are in good shape to be able to go. So it's a dilemma the UK government faces too. How do they go forward?
Yeah.
Now, there was, if you remember, during the debate, the UK's Chancellor said that if Brexit happens, then he has to have a very austere budget to make up for the problems they're going to face. But that was picked up upon by the Leave campaign to say they were just, fear mongering. Let's see what he does now. Of course, we don't know how long he will remain as Chancellor, but the PM going now, I suspect he will have to follow suit as well. But I think in the public finances of UK, they have a great dilemma between, on the one hand, remaining attractive jurisdiction for investment and doing business there. On the other hand, to fill the holes in their public finances.
Absolutely. I think the Chancellor George Osborne has a very difficult task at hand. We don't know whether he's going to be back as Chancellor in the new government or whether he's going to be the new Prime Minister. Shankar, a quick 30-second comment from you. Is Singapore looking at Brexit as an opportunity? A lot of companies headquartered in the UK shifting will probably they said they will look at new cities or new areas to headquarter their companies. Would Singapore want to maybe
I think,
tempt some of them to come there?
I mean, Singapore is quite good at this sort of thing. They'll keep positioning themselves to get as much benefit as they can. But clearly, this particular development is too new and fresh in everyone's mind. But in all these situations, I think every country will look for opportunities and threats and deal with them accordingly. I think.
Praveenji, final word from all of you. Starting with you, Praveenji.
I believe it will be in Europe's interest as a strong trade and strategic partner going forward. It cannot discount the potential of India, and whether it is UK or the rest of the European Union, we should be on a good wicket given the type of intellectual capital we have and the growth which is envisaged as far as our economy is concerned.
Yeah. Thanks, Praveenji. Mukesh bhai?
Yeah.
Arun, I want to make use of this opportunity to give you two quotes, very interesting.
Yeah.
One is by the home editor of BBC, Mark Easton.
Yeah.
He said the EU referendum has revealed an ancient, jagged fault line across the United Kingdom. It is a scar that is sliced through the conventional politics and traditional social structure, and it is far from clear whether the kingdom can still be called united. And the reason he's making this statement is because he's explained it, as we all have seen, that different cities have voted differently. It's not just the city of London which was against the exit, but also other major cities like Manchester, Bristol, Liverpool, so on and so forth. So there is now widespread, uh, you know, uh, debate in the capital of the UK that since the London is the driving force for the globalization agenda, London perhaps has not paid regard to the customs and way of life of the larger Britain. And London's overwhelming vote will remain simply as an evidence of what things are at the ground level. Now, this is very, very important because I think as a society, UK itself is divided. We keep on talking about it in the context of India that India is one republic but 29 states, 29 countries. I don't think the situation is any different actually if you look at it from a UK standpoint. And the last I would like to say is Mr. Jaitley just issued a statement where he said that all countries around the world will have to brace themselves for a period of possible turbulence, which
Absolutely.
while being watchful about, and we have to alert to and look at the referendum's impact from a medium-term standpoint. So I think that really sums up, important words of wisdom on today's development.
Thanks, Mukesh bhai. Kamay, 20 seconds.
No, no, no. So, the impact on India in the short term might be there, but not a significant one. I think the economy is very strong otherwise. So, Arun.
last word from a news article that appeared, I think, in the Business Insider. The impact of Brexit on the US elections and Trump's chances, Donald Trump's chances of making it to the White House. 3 words, 4 words, all bets are off. That is exactly what the voters of UK, the message that they have given. The voters always have the last laugh. My former professor of journalism, of politics at my journalism college, Professor Krishnanand, never fails to remind me what Sharad Yadav told him in 2004 when everyone was expecting Atal Bihari Vajpayee victory. And that's when Sharad Yadav told my professor, "Ye janta bahut ajeeb hai." That is exactly what the voters of Britain have proven today. Lessons for all of us, and surely this will cause a big, big impact in the weeks to come. It will unfold. The action will unfold. The drama will unfold over the next 6 weeks as we wait to learn who is going to be the captain of the ship that navigates UK through these turbulent times as they come out of the UK over the next come out of the EU over the next 2 years. Thanks Amay, thanks Mukesh Bhai, Praveen Ji, Shankar for joining us. Thanks viewers for joining this hangout. Thank you.
Thank you for calling us. Thank you.
Thank you.